All right, good evening, everyone. Hope you're doing great. This is Crossover Online. This is the 6th time we have done this. It does not seem like that would be the case, but it is. Again, we get to look at a section of Proverbs. We actually are finished. We are through the amount of time allotted. I don't know if it was easy or hard for you. I would guess it probably depends on whether or not you like books of the Bible that jump around a lot. If you do, then Proverbs is the book for you. And if not, if you like orderly books, then Proverbs is not the book for you. So 31 days of Proverbs ended last week. And so we will look at that last section tonight and have a different plan for next week. So some news before we get into what we're going for tonight. Not great news, but probably expected news to many of you. We will not be able to go to camp. We were going to go to Crossings Camp over there in Baghdad, Kentucky again. But camp has been canceled for June. Totally, I think they're still trying to figure out what they can do as far as anytime after that. But for right now, that's where that is. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to try to come up with something that'll be smaller scale, but that we can still do. So everything I'm hearing right now, it looks like we're going to move into phase 1 of release from the stay-at-home, order here in Indiana, probably in early May. I know a lot of people are going back to work on May 4th, and that looks like the first emphasis is going to be likely that businesses, that most businesses can stay open, continue with social distancing, but that at least the businesses can get open and then begin to kind of operate. And I would expect at least 2 weeks after that before we might hear anything different as far as the plan for churches. That's my guess. So what that means is, earliest it seems like we might be able to get together again on Wednesday nights would be about a month from now. This is the 22nd of April. Something like the 20th of May seems like right now would be the best case scenario, and as everybody knows, we haven't necessarily been getting the best case scenario, so I would like to try something different for this foreseeable future, and I would like us to try a Zoom call next week. So if you are seeing this now, which by the way, if you're seeing it now, you should say hi, so I'll know that you're there. If you're seeing this now, we'll try to do this next week at 4:30 on Wednesday. Okay, at 4:30. I figure that since you're at home, 6:30 is probably not the best time as far as when you might be not busy. Expect a lot of people to be eating around 6:30. So let's shoot for 4:30 next week. You should expect to get an email from me. If I don't have your email address, I'm going to be trying to get it from you. Please send me an email at jacksonvandyke@gmail.com. If I don't have your email, or even if you think that I might, please just send me one and say, hey, shoot me that invite. Because a Zoom call, if you don't know what that is, it'll just be, it's pretty easy. You'll click the link when you get the Zoom call invite. It'll ask you a couple questions about, do you want to use the mic that's plugged in, and can we see your screen and things like that. You answer those questions, and so we'll just try that next week. I'd like for us to try something different. I'd love to see some of y'all, especially ones that I haven't seen in now 6 weeks. And since we are finishing Proverbs, we need a new book. And I don't want to push you as hard in this next season, but I would like for us to start reading Galatians read 3 chapters next week. So the rest of this week you're off, but read 3 chapters throughout next week. We'll be talking about The Bridge to Life, which we had started a while back. But Galatians is a good book. It's about the gospel. It's about understanding how the gospel operates, what that message is for, why we have a message. And so 3 chapters of Galatians next week. And Zoom call 4:30. Look for an email. Again, if I don't have your email, please send me an email, jacksonvandyke@gmail.com, and tell me who you are. Yeah, it might tell me, but hey, tell me who you are in it. So that's the plan. I'll mention it again at the end, just so we're clear. And with that, we can jump into this last section of Proverbs. So what we've been doing. I see that Laura and the girls are here. Hi guys, good to see you. Well, I guess good to know that you're here. I don't see you, but we're going to work on that for next week. So let's get into this last section of Proverbs. What we've been after, we've been looking at Proverbs, trying to learn about fear and about human nature, and it's been fun the last few weeks because we've been looking at a few different things. Last week we talked about how this book of Proverbs, like many other sections of the Bible, is really emphasizing care for the poor is a defining characteristic of the people of God, and kind of magnifying self has been a theme of what not to do that we've seen so much. And so we're going to be in true Proverbs fashion in a kind of whole different frame tonight. 2 wholly kind of different sorts of things. But if you've read Proverbs, then you know that Proverbs jumps around all kinds of different times. And so that's just a part of it. So tonight is called Of Praise and Parents. Of Praise and Parents. So I, right now, am on the other end of something that I remember vividly from when I was a kid. I remember when I was a kid, I really not only wanted my mom to be proud of me. When she told me that she was proud of me, I would be so excited, and I would ask. I'd be like, "Wow, well, I did this too. Are you proud of me?" And she would say, "Oh yes, I'm very proud of you." And I would just be like, "Yes, this is awesome." So I'd make something, and I just really like that. And the Bible is very clear that that is the basic sentiment behind a well done, good and faithful servant. Is that if God is our Father, it is very natural for us to want to please Him and to take joy that we are pleasing Him. Well, right now, not so much Carter, but Cooper is fully in the stage that when you tell him you are proud of him, he's just like, well, really? Wow, so he's really into Legos and Duplos right now, and so he'll make a car, or he'll put little legs he puts like extra legs on on Lego guys. In fact, the other day he lined up like 10 sets of legs on this Lego guy, and then he's like, "Do you like it? Are you proud of me for making it?" And he'll ask that, and it's a great responsibility, and an amazing thing to see that it means a lot to him if I'm proud of him. And I was thinking about how much more complicated our world gets from when we're a little kid and we ask our parents if they're proud of us. And I think the biggest complicating factor, like the thing that really throws us off the most and the thing that can create the most problems, is when we encounter somebody who's willing to toot their own horn. I think sometime in high school, for me, I can remember being in high school, being on the wrestling team, And being around certain people who are completely willing to tell you how good they are, how good they think they are at wrestling, or at getting a girlfriend, or anything. And that was I don't know how exactly how this happens for young girls as much, but I know exactly how it takes place for boys, and it's often around sports and activities that a guy might get a few wins under his belt, and then he will start telling you himself how good he is and why he's winning, and these sorts of things. And what becomes really dangerous about this is, are you going to pick up this habit yourself? Because we can often reward, especially in our culture, we can reward people who are confident and cocky and talk a big game, puff themselves up. We don't model that well. Keeping people humble, or we will buy hype when people sell it themselves. And we are tempted to become our own hype machine because of that. And so the opening verse tonight, I have a lot of verses tonight. We'll be jumping around a few different places. The opening verse tonight is our advice about these situations when we run into this, whether it's excuse me, whether it's maybe we are into acting and plays, sports, maybe just social situations when somebody wants to say, here's why this is happening for me, because I'm good at this, and I'm better than all kinds of other people, and nobody can compete with me. Proverbs 27:2. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth. A stranger, and not your own lips. Let another praise you, and not your own mouth. Why is this wise? This is my first question for us to be thinking about. Why is this wise to not praise ourselves? So my question is, are we trustworthy to praise ourselves? Or do we view ourselves as the one who's probably had the hardest time in a situation? Do we view ourselves as being capable of judging how hard it was for us to accomplish the things that we might have accomplished? What reason do we have to not completely trust ourselves? Let me grab my drink. I'm getting really dry. I'll be right back. That is a weekly tradition at this point for me to go and have to get my drink. All right, so should we trust ourselves? Should we trust ourselves? Listen to this. 1 Corinthians 4:4-5. This is Paul. He says, my conscience is clear, but that does not vindicate me. That does not let me off the hook. And he's talking about this in regard to how he has served the Corinthian church. He says, therefore judge nothing before the proper time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. And at that time, each will receive his praise from God. So, we should not praise ourselves. Let somebody else praise you. And here's why. We are biased. We are biased. And we can't be trusted, even inside of our own minds, to judge whether or not we've tried harder than anybody else. And, yeah, like I'm seeing right there, that you guys wrote in, we should not contribute to our own pride, puffing ourselves up. Your pride blows you up, and in your own eyes, you can't judge how you really are in regard to anybody else. You cannot trust your own praise. You just can't. And so, other people's praise, though, you can trust. If you let somebody else praise you, look, people know this about each other, that you can trust what somebody says about another person more than you can trust what somebody might say about themselves, because the average person wants to put on a better front for who they are. And so another's praise is more trustworthy. And these are the things that guide our opinions. We can think about a simple case. Movies. Most of the time, the thing that will really get you to want to watch a movie is if somebody else tells you, well, this is a really good movie. Now, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you should come see my play, well then, you know probably not to ask, oh, is it going to be good? Well, they're not unbiased about that, right? They obviously are trying to do their best to make it good. They're in it. And so, praise works in this way, though, that people are trustworthy about other people besides themselves. Here's another kind of interesting way to think about this. Anybody who's ever been a runner has realized one very difficult thing about running to judge. Now, in one way, running is like the most straightforward of sports, because when somebody wins, they were the fastest. You know, it's pretty rare that somebody gets tripped in a race, especially like right at the end or something like this. Running is really straightforward in one way. It shows who was the fastest runner. But here's the thing that anybody who's been into running thinks about. Is that guy running harder than me? How much is he pushing himself? Because just like every other sport, some people are naturally more geared to it. For instance, in swimming, Michael Phelps, they talked about how Michael Phelps was built like a swimming machine with the big, huge, long arms. His muscles, his lats, his muscles in his back were just enormous. He was built like a swimmer. And some people are built like runners. Now, running has a lot to do with lung capacity, distribution of oxygen through blood flow to the whole body to get that lactic acid buildup out and to just bring fresh oxygen throughout the body. And so it is about legs and physical strength, but it's a lot about lungs too. But every runner has wondered, you can't tell how hard somebody else is pushing themselves. And here's the thing. Here's the reason that I'm bringing this in. Paul says here, my conscience is clear about the way I've served, but that doesn't vindicate me. It doesn't get me off the hook. He says, judge nothing before the proper time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. And at that time, each will receive his praise from God. In the same way, we look forward to the day when God will reveal who is his and that the whole world changes. That day is also the day when it'll bring to light the motives of people's hearts, and when we get to really receive the reward for our actions. And he says, look, at that time, everybody's going to receive his praise from God, because the motives of their heart, which is the deepest reason for why they were doing that thing, will be revealed. And so we look forward to that, but until then, it's not clear. And so you should not praise yourself. That just exposes you that you're not doing this for the right reasons. Just wait, and let God praise you. So let's move on. Proverbs 27:17 popular verse, iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Question, how do we sharpen each other? How is it that you can be sharpened? How does that happen? So you can sharpen each other by telling the truth to each other, first of all. Telling the truth in love. The Bible talks about telling the truth in love. Look, for instance, let's go back to running for a minute. If you see somebody who's running, and whether in training or in an actual race, they're never out of breath at the end, really. A good teammate would say, hey, are you trying? Are you pushing yourself? And asking the hard questions and telling the truth, saying, well, look, if you were really pushing yourself, you would be out of breath. You'd be really tired. And you don't seem like that. And look, if there's a good reason, you listen for it. But the first way that you can sharpen each other is telling the truth. Telling the truth. The second thing we can do for each other is identifying strengths and weaknesses. Part of telling the truth is being honest about your assessment of each other. At a certain point, you can handle this to where it's helpful for you. You can say, I see this weakness in you. I've known you a while. I can see your character, and I want you strong in the same way I hope you want you strong. I'm seeing there, challenging each other, and that was actually the next thing that I had. Pushing each other. Yeah, even calling each other out that we should be challenging to each other. This is one strength that I see. I never had brothers and sisters growing up. This is one strength that I often see in brothers and sisters is they will get right at each other. And sometimes they don't do the last thing that I wrote down here too much, which is encouraging each other, but they do challenge each other. Really, in a lot of situations, we'll have friends that will encourage us, and then often siblings will challenge us. We should really have both doing both. That we have relationships. Godly relationships look like that, where we want good for each other. So before we just let somebody kind of fall apart or get weaker, we would challenge them. So that's huge. Iron sharpens iron. So we can sharpen each other. This is a big change in our relationships. If we do this, our relationships will look different than just like a friend who kind of is like, well, I just am a yes man. I tell them whatever they want to do is fine, my friends, but if they ever are going to do something that I think is dangerous or something that I think is bad for them, well, I don't want to be a downer. Well, no, if you love them, you will tell them about things that you think are bad for them. So we should be thinking about this. This would make a change to our relationships if we asked how we could sharpen each other that way. So we're going to move through them. This is Proverbs 27:21. The crucible for silver and the furnace for gold, and each is tested by the praise accorded to him. The crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, and each is tested by the praise accorded him. Here's the other thing about praise. Have you ever thought about what it does to you when you do hear praise from somebody else's lips? Because here's the thing, we've already clarified you don't want to be praising yourself. But sometimes we do hear praise about us. But have you ever thought about what it is? And I know that some of us have talked before. The answer is not kind of one of the natural things we see in church or among Christians, which is to kind of like say, no, that's not true. Okay? We should not expect, by the way, that our friends or our Christian brothers and sisters are lying to us so that we would say it's not true. I think we're trying for humility when we do that, because we don't know what to do. But no, we should say thank you. But here's the other thing. So there's a story about C.S. Lewis, about a friend of his who, after all the Narnia series had come out, after all the theological works like Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters, Abolition of Man, and other great works of theology that C.S. Lewis had written, there was a friend of his that said, wow, do you realize, just having one of these candid conversations, and he said, wow, do you realize how much people look up to you and how much influence you have now? You could tell people anything at this point and they'd probably believe it. Have you thought about that? About how much influence you have? And in a serious tone, in just a low tone, serious as he could be, Lewis looked back at his friend and he said, one can't be too careful not to think about that. Because he knew the danger. We are not to sit around thinking about how much power we might have over others. We are fine. We are completely fine if we're in a position somebody says, hey, you sang a great song at church today. Or, wow, you're really good at soccer. You should smile. You should say thank you. And in a lot of ways, this is an instance where little kids are a great example. Little kids smile, look you in the face, smile, and then they move on to the next thing. And know that God gave us that. In this instance, this story related to this, Lewis talks about how there's an instant here where we can either go right on the right track, or in an instant we can be on the wrong track. The right track is saying thank you, knowing that all praise goes to God because He's the giver of all these gifts. But the wrong move is to think, well, yes, of course, people look up to me because I'm the sort of person that people should be looking up to, because I know what's going on, because I am solid and I am the kind of person that people ought to be listening to. Listen to this. This is actually continues the section from 1 Corinthians 4 that we were reading earlier. So earlier was 1 Corinthians 4, 4 through 5, and this is going to be 1 Corinthians 4, 6 through 7. It says, now, brethren, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, so that you may learn from us the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. Then you will not be puffed up in being a follower of one of us over against the other. For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not? We have to always keep in mind, especially when you receive a compliment, know in yourself, this is great. God's given me some gifts and I'm using them. Praise be to God. I'm going to keep doing it. It's great. You just have to be a person who's on the move. Think about moving through it rather than taking that and going, yes, because I'm the sort of person who's better off for people to be paying attention to and those sorts of things. So that's a really big point. All right, we're going to move out of Proverbs 27. And a few, kind of tonight is a lot of little insights, and then we kind of end with an exercise. So, Proverbs 28. The wicked, this is verse 1. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. You've got to realize that your moral compass helps you assess threats and manage your own heart. Your character, your ability to have a track record of behaving in a certain way, it causes you to look at the world and to either see it as it is or to see it as something completely different. Listen to it one more time. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing. Why? Because they're afraid. Well, there's got to be something going on out there that'll get me. But the righteous are as bold as a lion. Your moral compass, your character, affects the way you view the world. One way you might have heard this talked about, that to someone who's a hammer, everything looks like a nail. All right? But meanwhile, in this world, there are a lot of different tools for a lot of different situations. Your moral compass, your character, influences how you see the world. So this is called a constitution. This is a philosophical term. We often think of the Constitution as the document that our country is founded on, but Constitution is a word for what you're made of at your core. What actually is driving you, and is it consistent? The reason that we often don't think about the word Constitution is because we don't get to the point to where we realize we have a Constitution and that it's being written, that our character exists, and we ought to get there. We really ought to get there because it's affecting how we see the world every day. All right, same chapter, Proverbs 28, verse 4. Those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive with them. If you are impressed when underhanded people deceive and win, you're foolish. That's a short-term gain for a long-term loss. All right. If you're impressed when somebody really manipulates a situation, say somebody goes to somewhere like Las Vegas and they game the system, and then they win money in the short term. That's obviously a simple example, but I have a longer story about this one. So Megan and I have finished 2 seasons of Survivor during this stay-at-home period. So far, we finished another season earlier tonight, and not in these last 2 seasons, but there was a player who was a fairly legendary Survivor player for a reason, from probably, I think the time where he made the biggest splash was in a season called Survivor Heroes versus Villains, where he had already been a villain before, and he came back as one of the biggest villains, and his name was Russell Hantz. And here's what I want you to know about Russell. Long story short, in Survivor, you don't want to be voted out because you stay in the game, you can win $1 million, and you need to win challenges and make alliances, have people who will be voting with you and who trust you. But then the end of the game is weird because the last either something like 7 or maybe 9 people will be the jury. And the way the game works is that there will be 2 or 3 people who at the end will say, I'm left here, this is why you should vote for me to win the game. And they'll be talking to the people on the jury and saying, even though I might have voted you out or helped to get you out, here's why I played the game well. And here's the thing about Russell. Russell was so good at manipulating and conniving, pulling things over, mixing people up on what was going on in the game. But he didn't really have connections with people. And so he's played the game a few times, and he couldn't win because he alienated everybody. He made people angry with him, and you're never going to get votes at the end of the game if all you do is manipulate every single person, make them all angry. And so while Russell understood the social aspect of the game, short-term gains he had, but long-term losses. So exactly what we were talking about here, that those who forsake the law praise the wicked, but those who keep the law strive with them. And so we should not be impressed by people who win by underhanded means. It's a short-term game for a long-term loss. We've got to be wisdom in one of the simplest senses is the ability to think long-term, to see beyond just what will happen today, what I want right now. I mean, a sign that we've seen over and over again in Proverbs is that you can tell a short-sighted person or a person who is a fool and not wise because they don't think beyond right now. I mean, think about how they've talked about somebody who buries their hand in the dish and they're so lazy they can't get it to come back out. Well, it's because they've eaten today, so what else is to think about? What else is to worry about? So that's what you see there in verse 4. So Proverbs 28, and now we'll move right to the next verse, verse 5. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all things. There's an argument against trusting Jesus. It's a little weird argument, but you might run into it sooner or later. And it says that we shouldn't ask for his help because it's not fair. like he had a leg up. He was God as well as man, and that's an advantage that he has. Well, that's true. And here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Jesus did have an advantage, but he fought and never sinned. And so, in his human self, being completely human, he knows what it's like to fight sin to the uttermost. Anyone who has given in to sin knows how to give in, and knows not what somebody knows who fought sin all the way. Because here's the thing. Who understands what it's like to go to war? Somebody who signs up to go to war, who travels, who trains, and who fights, and never backs down, right? Think about all of those things that I just said, and that certainly there are people who may never sign up when the call might come. There are people who don't go to the location, don't endure the training. When it really comes down to it, can't make it on the battlefield, can't handle it. And at all those stages, those people don't know what the person who stays in the battle, who signed up, went, trained, entered the battlefield, and fought all the way through. That is Jesus, who endured everything. And so that might not have been an argument that you've heard before, but you might hear it sooner or later. And this verse reminded me of it, that evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand all things. Because here's the weird thing. If you are evil, you don't understand evil or good. But those who strive for the good understand the pull of evil and also understand what it is to love the good. So let's be those people. Let's be those people. All right. Proverbs 29. I've got just one verse that I want us to look at in a couple of different translations. This is Proverbs 29, 1. The New American Standard version has a funny way to state it, so I have a different one too. A man who hardens his neck after much reproof will suddenly be broken beyond remedy. But listen to this. This is New Living. Whoever stubbornly refuses to accept criticism will be suddenly destroyed beyond recovery. I used to build some tree houses. My friend Jeremy May and I, when I was a kid at my dad's house, we would go out in the woods and sometimes we would build tree houses. And this made me think about that, refusing to accept criticism. Because you don't know how to build when you're a kid and you just got wood and nails and you're just trying to hammer it into a tree, right? And if somebody's telling you while you're doing this, hey, I don't think that's going to hold, and you just keep saying, you don't know what you're talking about, I'll just keep doing it. Somebody says, hey, I really don't think it's going to hold, you should do something different there. You just do your own thing, I'm doing my thing. What this says is that if you keep refusing criticism, one of these days it's all just going to fall in on you. And it says you'll be destroyed beyond recovery, which again is a great example. I think about building a bridge. You know, if people are telling you that you need to check something out about that bridge, you should probably listen to the criticism there, right? And in our lives, in the same way, that we should check that criticism, check for what people are talking about. Now, this is going to be rare. This might be the only time this ever happens. So, I shall now, as an example for this, I shall praise one aspect of a newer Star Wars movie at the expense of an older Star Wars movie. Okay, so I hope y'all are prepared for this and that you don't expect it. I don't know if this will ever happen again. All right. So they tried to do something in Episode 8, my least favorite Star Wars movie of all time overall, but they did something in Episode 8 that I thought was a pretty good thing. They really had a design for the character of Poe Dameron that I thought was a pretty neat story arc. Now, throughout the 80s, in which I grew up watching movies, there was a lot of characters that were kind of like Rocky is a great example. Not only is he the underdog, people are going to tell him, hey, you definitely shouldn't fight Drago, or you shouldn't fight. I think he was probably told not to fight multiple people that he fights in there. And then he does it. Why? Because he thinks he knows better, right? And a lot of the characters, I love these movies, but a lot of the characters Harrison Ford played, both in Star Wars and in Indiana Jones and things, there's a lot of examples of just, there's nobody else in this movie that seems to know anything. Just this one character who, if there's any advice, I would love to see like statistics on advice given in 80s movies and whether the characters ever take it, and how often they refuse it. You know, that like basically only negative advice is given and then they refuse it. That's pretty much the thing that happens. Now, Han Solo is a great sample of this kind of character who doesn't take advice, doesn't really listen. And what they were trying to do with Poe Dameron that I think is pretty neat is they were trying to show how he went off and he did his own thing and his plan just failed, that he was wrong. I think that's fine. I think that's pretty neat, really, that because it is not a hero, according to the Bible, is not someone who walks around going, I'm the only one who knows anything, okay? That's not the takeaway from Jesus. In fact, you can look at Peter. You can look at the Apostle Peter, and the lesson that Jesus taught to Peter was, hey, you're going to fail, and you're going to have other people who are going to have to correct you. I mean, if you keep reading about Peter, he gets corrected by Paul later on because Peter starts limiting himself to hanging around with the Jews. Peter fails, and yes, he's a strong-willed leader, but he has to be corrected. A Christian leader, a leader in terms of what the Bible teaches, is someone who is wise and knows how to take good advice, how to discern good advice from bad advice, okay? Not somebody who just has all the abilities, who's a good fighter, who knows exactly what to do in every situation. It's not somebody like that. It's somebody who knows how to take the advice that is right and act on it, right? Not somebody who just disregards bad advice or disregards all advice. And so, hear me carefully. That one element of The Last Jedi, I think is good. And I don't even know if it's executed that well, but I think the idea is very good. And I like that. I like that element. All right. Now we're going to shift. We're going to shift to our last major point. Proverbs 30. Proverbs 30. There's a kind of man. This is Proverbs 30, verse 11. There is a kind of man who curses his father and does not bless his mother. There is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed from his filthiness. There is a kind, oh how lofty are his eyes, and his eyelids are raised in arrogance. There's a kind of man whose teeth are like swords, and his jaw teeth like knives, to devour the afflicted from the earth and the needy from among men. Now, this is a violent man, obviously, but where does it start? Where does the violence, disregard for authority start? It starts with cursing his father and refusing to bless his mother. So look, this is a simple encouragement. Treat your dad well. Thank your mother. Be the kind of person who can appreciate the good things that your parents do for you. Listen, I say this as a person who has not always had a perfect relationship with my parents. You should not blame all your problems on your parents. I remember I read this G.K. Chesterton quote where he said, unlike every other modern, I did not have a terrible mother or a deadbeat father to blame all my other problems. G.K. Chesterton lived in the early 1900s, and I hope it just gives you pause to think that we are passing 100 years of people blaming their shortcomings on their mother and their father. The background of this, probably kind of where this came from in popular culture, is Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud, writing in the latter half of the 1800s, pioneered this idea that your parents created all kinds of problems in you. Probably that the reason that you're not who you ought to be is to blame on your parents. Your parents were the ones who set you up the way that you are. And look, again, we take our advice from the Bible. Mostly Sigmund Freud's theories are not regarded well even in psychological circles now. The way this works is that these ideas will get out into the wider world, and it takes longer for ideas, bad ideas, to get circulated out in the culture at large, because people are not testing these ideas. They just live in people's minds. And so I appreciated very much hearing that from Chesterton, and it's also sad for me to think about over probably the number is right around 150 years now of people mainly blaming their shortcomings on their parents. And keep in mind, that will not stand before God if it's not the truth. Sure, some people have had a really grave disservice. If anybody's abused by their parents, that is horrible. It is a disservice to anyone to be abusive towards them. But a quick survey of history will find some amazing people who had a terrible upbringing. People who make so much out of struggle and what little good they had from their upbringing. And then also, any survey of history will find people who had a great upbringing, who had every opportunity, and squander it. And here's the thing. It's not as simple as that kind of cross. Sometimes you have people who had a very good upbringing and make much of it. And then sometimes you have people who had a pretty tough upbringing and squander what they were given. So that all happens. That is there. That is there. And so long story short from this section, treat your dad well. Thank your mother. Okay? Continues in verse 17. The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother, the ravens of the valleys will pick it out, and the young eagles will eat it. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. And before I give you my top 10 list for the night, I want to give you Proverbs 31. These are kind of like the last takeaways for the future. Proverbs 31:21, talking about what a godly woman is like. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. And then Proverbs 31:25, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she smiles at the future. Two aspects there that are often not talked about too much from the Proverbs 31 woman, which is a very popular kind of set of ideas. Preparation is the theme there in verse 21. And then she can smile at the future because she trusts God. She's done what she can. And so from these things, pray, prepare, do your best, and leave him the rest. Pray, prepare, do your best, leave him the rest. Now, for closing, here's what I've got. We are nearing, it looks like, the end to some degree. We're at least lessening the time that we've had at home. So in this time, I want to give you, I was thinking about the theme here of parents, and I want to give you the best 10 questions that I have seen. I looked up a bunch of questions today about questions that teenagers could ask their parents just to really make the most of this unique time that we've had where we're home with each other. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you these, but I've already put them, I believe, in the notes down there. If you click show more in the notes for this live stream and then for the